Hi, all you ATU members. This is Bill Berry, and we are back. This is session 2, and we talk about the history of grievances. And the reason we talk about the history of grievances is because we want to look at the past to see what's the best for the future. Because many of the members in the old days had great ways of dealing with the unions and problems and with their bosses. And we need to look at what they've done, how it's changed over the last 40 or 50 years, and maybe how we can rethink and relearn everything that we do. We talked in the last session about the organizing model of unionism. And way back in the early days, pretty much before the Second World War, the union's success depended on total membership involvement. They didn't have money for staff. They didn't have money for offices. When you look at the early international union of the ATU, which started in 1892, they had rented office spaces, a few officers, but none of the resources that unions have today. And so the only way that they were successful in dealing with the bosses individually and politically was through total membership involvement. The passion of the members and their vision of making life better for themselves and their children. And if you ever take a labor history course, it's really inspiring. If you go back to the early days of the United States, right after the American War of Independence, it was a crime to do what we're doing. That is, for workers to gain collective power was considered a criminal conspiracy. And men in the shoemakers union in Baltimore and in Philadelphia and in New York City were taken to court and convicted and fined and put in jail for it. Much later, as workers began to organize, the bosses had a very simple solution. They call out the police, they call out private armies, they call out the federal troops, they call out private thugs, and they kill them. And so we have finally brought a civilization into labor relations after the Second World War. But in the early days, the families, the communities all stood with workers when they had a problem. And we need to look at that and understand what it was. Over time, particularly after the Second World War, unions became more established. They began to have resources, they had full-time staff, they had international and local offices, and they developed the servicing model of unionism, which became dominant structure. And it worked. As I said in the first session, unions made us the wealthiest workers in the world. People had their own homes, sometimes two homes, our own cars. Our kids went to school, went to college. Things were good. We had retirement plans, we had health insurance. But since the mid-1990s, that has really changed. And you can look at when it started to change after the Second World War. Was it the firing of the Patco strikers by Ronald Reagan in 1981? Or is it other campaigns like the one that Scott Walker runs, or we've seen in other states where they've gone to an open shop? But people then, in the mid-1990s, looked at unionism and said, we're not headed in the right direction. We need to rethink what we do. And so the organizing model was revived as at least a discussion topic. So we looked then at what the organizing model did. The grievances as unionism developed in the United States were everything, and often people lived in company towns. The first strike, as far as we know, was on the Egyptian pyramids back in 300 or so BC, where the workers building it were denied their corn rations and stopped work. And that was one of the most important things that workers did. They looked at pressure points. Where can we pressure the boss to make him do what we want him to do? And often that was work stoppages or slowdowns or activities that now are considered to be illegal. What we have found, and you will see in the documents that I'm going to talk to you about in a few minutes, grievance handling has really changed in the past few years, because we have gone to formal grievance procedures, we have gone to a small committee from the union and a small committee from management handling workplace disputes, And the general thinking is if you have a grievance that you can't settle, you take it to arbitration. This basically shuts out your members and creates a huge expense for the local and is a very, very difficult way to go. And so what we're going to see in the next part is a history of how this way of handling grievances changed. And I think that you're going to find it important to know because the history of the unions is a guide to the future.